You ever feel like you're busting your tail harder than everyone around you, but somehow you're still losing? Like you're the first one clocking in and the last one out, but the results just aren't there. Maybe you re-pulling 12-hour shifts while your coworker is out the door at 2 and gets the promotion you deserved. Or maybe you're flat out exhausted, running on empty, barely sleeping, watching other people win with what looks like half the effort you're putting in. If you've ever wondered why grinding isn't enough, if you're sick and tired of being tired with nothing to show for it, then what I'm about to tell you will completely change the way you approach work. Because there was this farmer who nearly destroyed everything he had by working himself into the ground. Until one conversation flipped his entire world upside down and taught him the difference between effort and strategy. Stick with me to the end, because this hits different. Out in this farming valley where families had been working the same land for generations, there was this 32-year-old guy named Thomas. Thomas had a small 10-acre farm that his old man left him, and Thomas believed in one thing above everything else: hard work. Every single morning, Thomas was up at 4 a.m., before the sun even thought about coming up. He worked those fields with his bare hands, refused to drop money on modern equipment. "My grandfather did it this way," he'd say. "Hard work's the only honest way." He planted every seed by hand, watered every row with a bucket, pulled every weed himself. Sunrise to sunset, Thomas was out there grinding. His hands were torn up and bleeding, his back constantly aching, but he wore that exhaustion like a war medal. At night, he'd just collapse into bed, too wiped out to even eat right, too wiped out to spend any real time with his wife, Sarah. She'd look at him with these worried eyes and say, "Thomas, you're killing yourself. There's gotta be a better way." But Thomas would just shake his head. "Sarah, success takes sacrifice. Hard work never fails. I just need to work harder." The other farmers in the area would watch Thomas with this mix of respect and pity. "That guy works like 3 men," they'd say. If hard work alone made you rich, Thomas would be a millionaire. But here's the brutal truth. Despite working twice as many hours as everyone else, Thomas's farm barely produced enough to keep them afloat. Every harvest was a struggle. Every season pulled him deeper into debt. His crops were average. His yield was nothing special. And worst of all, he had no time, no energy, and no life outside of work. Right next door to Thomas lived this guy named Richard. Same age, same size farm, actually started with less money than Thomas. But something was way different. Richard worked from 8 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, just 6 hours a day. He had modern irrigation systems, hired some part-time help during harvest season, and spent his evenings reading, chilling, and traveling with his family. And somehow, Richard's farm was producing twice what Thomas's did. This fact ate at Thomas every single night. Then one brutal summer, a drought hit the valley hard. Water dried up. Every farmer was dealing with the same problem. How do you keep crops alive when there's barely any water? Thomas decided to work even harder. He started getting up at 3 a.m. instead of 4. He was hauling water buckets from this well way out there, making 50 trips a day. His body was screaming at him to stop, but he kept pushing. Hard work never fails. He kept telling himself like it was some kind of mantra. Meanwhile, Richard just tweaked his irrigation system to deliver water more efficiently during the cooler hours, barely losing any to evaporation. On the 15th day of this insane routine, something inside Thomas just snapped. He was carrying his 40th bucket when his vision went blurry. His legs buckled. The bucket slipped right out of his hands, all that precious water just spilling into the dirt. Thomas dropped to his knees, gasping for air, his heart pounding all weird. Sarah found him there, collapsed between rows of dying crops, too exhausted to even stand up. The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. "Mr. Thomas, your body's shutting down. You're dehydrated, sleep-deprived, and you're on the edge of a heart attack. If you keep this up, you won't make it to next harvest. Not because of the drought, because you'll be dead." That night, lying in bed with 4 fluids dripping into his arm, Thomas just stared at the ceiling and felt something he'd never felt before. Complete defeat. Not defeat from the drought or the circumstances, but defeat from realizing that everything he believed, the whole foundation of his life, might be completely wrong. "I did everything right," he whispered to Sarah. "I worked harder than anyone. I sacrificed everything. Why am I failing?" Sarah squeezed his hand and said, "Maybe, honey, hard work isn't the answer. Maybe there's something you haven't figured out yet." That sentence kept Thomas up all night. 3 days later, when Thomas could finally walk again, he did something his pride had never let him do before. He knocked on Richard's door. Richard opened it with this surprised smile. "Thomas, I heard about what happened. Come on in." They sat on Richard's porch looking out over his thriving farm. Thomas looked at those green, healthy crops, twice as thick as his own struggling fields, and felt this weird mix of jealousy and curiosity. "Richard," Thomas started, his voice humble for the first time in forever, "I need to understand something. I work twice your hours. I pour everything I've got into my farm. But you work half the time and produce double the results. How?" Richard stayed quiet for a second, then stood up. "Come on, let me show you something." They walked over to Richard's tool shed. Richard grabbed 2 axes, one old and dull, one sharp and shining. "Thomas, imagine 2 lumberjacks competing to chop down trees. The first guy swings his axe for 12 hours straight, never stops, never rests. He thinks more effort means more trees." Richard handed Thomas the dull axe and pointed at this thick log. "Try it." Thomas swung hard. The axe just bounced off, barely made a scratch. He swung again and again. After 10 swings, he was breathing heavy, and the log had this shallow little cut in it. Richard took the sharp axe and swung once. It bit deep into the wood. 3 more swings and the log split clean in 2. "The second lumberjack," Richard continued, "works for 10 hours, but every hour he stops for 10 minutes to sharpen his axe. His competitors making fun of him like, 'You're wasting time, keep swinging.' But by the end of the day, the second guy's cut down twice as many trees." Richard looked Thomas dead in the eyes. "You're the first lumberjack, my friend. You've been swinging a dull axe for years, wondering why your hands are bleeding, but the tree isn't falling." Richard walked Thomas through his farm, breaking down 3 principles. First, systems over effort. "I don't haul water in buckets. I installed a drip irrigation system that delivers water straight to the roots with 0 waste. Cost me money up front, but now it runs automatically while I'm sleeping. You spend 6 hours hauling water. My system does the same job in 10 minutes. Second, focus over hustle. I only grow 2 crops that do great in our soil. You're growing 5 different crops, spreading yourself way too thin. I master 2 things. You're struggling with 5. I produce excellence. You produce mediocrity. Third, rest is part of the strategy. My brain's fresh every day because I sleep 8 hours, exercise, take breaks. I make better decisions. I catch problems early. I innovate. You're so exhausted you can't think straight. You're making mistakes that cost you even more time to fix." Richard put his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Thomas, you're not failing because you don't work hard enough. You're failing because you only know how to work hard. There's a difference between motion and progress, between being busy and being effective." He pointed out at the fields. "Hard work is the foundation. I respect that. But hard work without strategy is just suffering. It's time to sharpen your axe." Thomas went home that evening with his mind spinning and his heart full of something new, hope. For the first time in years, he didn't immediately rush out to his fields. Instead, he sat down with Sarah and a notebook. "Teach me to think differently," he said. The next morning, Thomas did something radical. He worked for 4 hours, then stopped. He used that time to research irrigation systems, visited the local agricultural office, talked to suppliers, made a plan. Within 2 weeks, he'd sold an old tractor he never used anyway and bought a basic drip irrigation system. Installing it took 3 days. But once it was running, his water delivery time dropped from 6 hours a day to 20 minutes. The time he saved, he put into improving his soil, studying crop patterns, and actually planning instead of just reacting. Thomas cut his crop varieties from 5 down to 2, the ones that grew best in his soil, and sold for top dollar. Instead of being mediocre at 5 things, he became excellent at 2. He hired his neighbor's teenage son to help during peak season, paid him fairly. Thomas realized 1 hour of strategic planning created more value than 10 hours of mindless labor. But the deepest change wasn't in his farm, it was in his life. For the first time in years, Thomas had dinner with Sarah. They talked, they laughed. He had energy to play with his kids. He started working out in the mornings, which actually made him stronger and sharper during work hours. His friends noticed. "Thomas, you're working less, but you look healthier, happier." Thomas would smile and say, "I'm working smarter." Turns out you can't think clearly when you're exhausted. 6 months later, the next harvest rolled around. Thomas's fields, now efficiently irrigated and properly managed, produced 40% more than his best year ever. Not because he worked harder, but because every hour of work was strategic, focused, and effective. He worked 7 hours a day instead of 15, but those 7 hours produced more than his 15 ever did. Richard came over one evening and walked through Thomas's transformed farm. He nodded with approval. "You learned a lesson, my friend. Now you're not just a hard worker, you're a smart worker." Thomas grabbed Richard's hand. "Thank you for showing me. There's more than one way to build something great." Listen, Thomas's story isn't just about farming. It's about every single person who thinks that suffering equals success, that if you're not exhausted, you're not trying hard enough. Here's the truth nobody tells you. Hard work is necessary, but it's not enough. The most successful people in the world don't work the most hours. They work the smartest hours. Remember 3 things. First, before you work harder, ask if there's a system that could work smarter. Don't carry water in buckets if you can build a pipeline. Don't manually do what technology can automate. Don't brute force what strategy can solve. Second, focus beats hustle every time. Stop trying to do everything. Pick 2 or 3 things that create the most value and become excellent at those. Mastery in a few areas beats mediocrity in many. Third, rest isn't the opposite of productivity, it's part of it. A tired mind makes expensive mistakes. A rested mind sees opportunities. You can't think strategically when you're running on fumes. So here's your challenge. Look at your work this week. Find the one task you spend the most time on and ask yourself, is there a smarter way to do this? A system I could build? A tool I could use? Someone I could delegate to? Then take one afternoon, just one, to implement a smarter system instead of just grinding harder. Because here's what Thomas learned and what you need to know. You're not a machine designed to run until it breaks. You're a human with a brilliant mind capable of creating leverage. Stop swinging the dull axe. It's time to sharpen it. If this story resonates with you, if you've been grinding yourself into the ground, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs permission to work smarter, not just harder. Drop a comment and tell me what's one task you're going to optimize this week. Let's share strategies and learn from each other. I'll be back next week with another story to transform how you think about success. Until then, remember, strategy beats exhaustion every single time. Your best work happens when your mind is sharp, not when your body is broken.